Hello everyone, this is Hamza Khan, and today I'll be kind of walking you over how to design an organization in a mergers and acquisition deal. Now, this would be more of an advanced training. The scenario that we will be covering would be a sell side scenario where an organization is divesting or carving out a part of their business. So I'll be focusing on the carve out methodology and part of the organization discuss on who and what within any function will go with the deal. And we'll also discuss like various strategies on how to optimize the organization from a stranded cost perspective to ensure that the value of the deal is preserved. Now, taking a quick step back, separations are usually lengthy, costly, and they put a high level of strain on internal resources. But they're also a very good opportunity to generate an enormous amount of value for the seller. If the separation is done correctly, the seller will become more cost efficient and they will run their operations more effectively. On the other hand, if the separation is not done correctly, it will result in an operationally inefficient organization and also increase their costs, which will basically rob value from the deal. Now, coming back to this scenario, so as discussed before, the viewpoint is from a sell side perspective where an organization is selling the organization. The scope would be a carve out, and basically that means that the seller is selling a part of their business. And from a buyer's approach perspective, the buyer could either stand up the whole company and or either integrate the company into their organization as well. As it comes to here, you probably notice that it states as IT here. So we're going to be using IT as a functional example, but this could be applied to any organization as well, organization from a functional perspective. Now, if you focus on the left side over to the pre-sign phase. So the goal of the seller in the pre-sign phase is usually to ensure that the seller is well prepared for signing and is able to articulate the story of the transaction in a way that will extract as much value as possible for the seller. As it relates to the IT operating model, we'll be assessing the IT operating model, building up a current state, and also defining the day one IT operating model as well. As it relates to the IT organization, well, the first step is to define the strategy or what to share with the buyer. And we do this first by building out a current state assessment of the organization. Here, what we'll do is we'll document how the organization operates today, the skill set of the people, the functional areas that they cover. We'll also identify people who are shared with other parts of the organization and people who are dedicated to the section of the business that the seller will be carving out. We'll also capture kind of the salary, title, and benefits data from any census or HR files that they have. The assessment is very important and is a very critical part and will be input to other areas such as the day one model. It will be helping out with the standalone model, the one-time cost, and as well as the TSA schedule. Once we have a good understanding of what the current state organization is, the next activity is to define the day one our organization model. And this will define the plan of how to transition the people and the third-party systems to the buyer on day one, and the level of support it'll be requiring from a TSA perspective. The day one organization should also define which resources will move to the buyer on day one, and also the resources that will stay with the organization to support the transition service agreements, also known as your TSAs. This will also be a good time to identify any resources that will be critical for the remaining company for the future state organization as well. Now, we brought in a concept of transition service agreements, also known as TSA. So these are like interim service agreements that the seller signs with the buyer to ensure that the buyer is able to set up or stand up any of the functional areas out there. And this is another concept we'll discuss more in detail in another training, and I highly suggest you take the TSA training before you kind of get into this topic. Um, the other thing is we'll also start preparing a view of the standalone cost and also as the one-time cost as well. This will help plan the capacity for the existing resources and also determine the level of contractor support that will be needed to execute the separation projects. Now, if we turn our focus to the pre-close sign period, so when the deal gets signed, we actually enter the pre-close sign, basically also known as the sign to close period. In this phase, the key focus is that the seller is ready for the day one close and also is able to execute all the separation level projects for a successful cutover. As it relates from an organization perspective, we'll be establishing the day one organization, and we do this by identifying and onboarding key resources. A really good practice is to create a resourcing plan, which will take into account the skills, expertise, as well as the capacity for each resource. Additionally, we'll identify any potential risk of losing key individuals and develop mitigation plans to address those risks. While all this is going on, we will build teams to execute the sign to close projects and determine staffing needs for projects that will be required for day one as well. In addition to the day one organization, we'll start to enhance the design of the future state organization for the remaining company at this time as well. And lastly, we'll prepare a stranded cost analysis. And basically, this is to kind of determine what the stranded costs are once all the part of the business is divested, the remaining company, the additional costs related to it, what are those related, what will be those stranded costs there, and describe any mitigation strategies to minimize the stranded costs from an IT organization perspective as well. Now, once the kind of deal gets signed, we move into the pre-close phase period. Now, from a transaction team perspective, the focus now switches. Now, the focus of the team is to kind of manage the execution of the transition services agreements. They're also going to start transitioning third-party contracts and licenses, and also to ensure the separation projects are executed and monitored. From an IT organization perspective, we want to ensure that we have a right team to deliver the transition services agreements. The resources have the capacity to deliver the TSCs, and the resources have the bandwidth as it relates to any internal initiatives that they might be working on that would interfere with their day-to-day job. Additionally, during the post-close phase, we'll start implementing the future state organization as well, and execute any cost mitigation strategies for stranded costs. Once the TSAs start winding down in the TSA exit phase from an IT organization perspective, our focus area will now kind of shift to continue to implement the future state organization for remaining company and also execute any cost mitigation strategies as the TSAs kind of terminate out there. So kind of in summary, like what are the key considerations by phase to optimize the organization design, and what are the key things that we need to be looking at? So the first consideration is that the seller needs to determine what to share and what not to share with the buyer. And you do this and the purpose of this is to be a well-prepared seller and be able to articulate the story of why this business is a good idea. And also to structure the operating model and the organization in a way that will enhance the value for the seller. So conducting an early resource cost analysis, both from a standalone and one-time cost perspective, is a very good practice. This will help determine the best way to design the day one operating model and also enable the transaction team to develop any strategies to recoup those costs. The other consideration is to identify resources that are shared with other parts of the organization and that are dedicated to the part of the business that you're selling, also known as the carve-out. The second consideration is to optimize your stranded costs and resources for the remaining company. A really good best practice is having a plan in place to reduce headcount after the deal is done. And a good way of doing this is have a good perspective on what the critical resources that the remaining company would need early on in the deal, and then negotiating with the buyer to move as many of those resources to the buyer that are not required by the remaining company. This will significantly decrease the stranded cost. And lastly, the third consideration is that the level of separation and TSA support that the resources will be providing. And during the separation, resources will be getting pulled in many different directions, such as executing separation projects, supporting transition services agreements, and also continue to work on various internal initiatives. Having a good resource plan in place is critical, and it should address things like who will be working on which projects and what should be the right mix of employees and contractors. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be creating more of these videos to kind of describe all the nuances and the words related to it, and looking forward to our next meeting. Take care, guys. Bye bye.